Hi history friends, Mr. Sherman again. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the end of World War II. Before we do that, I'm going to have to stop the little peep dance party that's going on right here. I thought I could continue this with that little light show, but I can't. Here's the deal. In February of 1945, the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, or the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, met at a place called Yalta. The reason that they met is they wanted to talk about things like collective security after the war. They wanted to talk about self-determination, or the fact that people should be able to freely vote. And they really wanted to reestablish Europe, kind of the way it was before, minus an evil Germany. They were going to occupy Germany. Roosevelt in particular wanted the Soviet Union to be involved in this new idea, the United Nations, and it was decided that we were going to try Nazis at the end of the war. Overall, and probably the most important thing for the United States and FDR, was the idea that we needed to get the Soviet Union involved in a second front against the Empire of Japan. The end result of Yalta, unfortunately, was that Stalin lied. Basically, anyone could have seen this coming. FDR, for whatever reason, did not. Stalin lied. There were no free elections in Europe, and what's going to happen is the Soviet Union is going to install communist and Soviet-friendly countries as a buffer against the West. Also in February, the United States and Great Britain are going to attack the historic city of Dresden. Dresden is a German city that had been there since medieval times. It was absolutely gorgeous. The architecture was amazing. It had never been targeted before because there was no real military value in the city. However, there was a worry that once Berlin fell, they might shift the seat of government to Dresden, and it was becoming a communications hub. There was also the thought that, you know what, Germany deserves it, and if we hammer this one city, maybe that will make a difference, because regular strategic bombing, while still slowing the enemy's ability to fight, wasn't seeming to end the war. But here's the deal. It was an ancient city, and 35,000 civilians died. This is a huge deal, and it was toward the end of the war. It is still today seen as questionably, was it necessary to bomb those civilians? A very interesting question. Next, in April, what we start to see is the allies that we trusted started to come across concentration camps. The Americans came across Odorov, the British came across Belsen, and we knew this. I mean, the Soviets had already come across concentration camps. They knew what was going on. We knew about it. But this was the first time that our soldiers actually saw what was going on, and this was a pretty scary deal. We really had an idea of the scope of the Holocaust because our soldiers witnessed it firsthand. One of the things you need to know about the Holocaust is it involved the murder of in Auschwitz alone, 1.1 million Jews were murdered, but overall, more than 6 million Jews alone were murdered during the Holocaust, and 11 million other people were also murdered during the Holocaust. Now, these were not enemy combatants. These were civilians, and in some cases, particularly with the Soviets, Soviet prisoners of war. These were people that were non-combatants at the time that they were killed. And so that is why it's murder. Out of this, we start to get new terminology like genocide, not only the Holocaust itself, and then also the idea of crimes against humanity. Overall in World War II, 85 million people died, and that was over 3% of the entire world's population. It's just unbelievable. What could we have done to stop this? Overall, our FDR and our commanding generals decided that the fastest way to end the murders was to end the war faster. And so we did not specifically target, say, a concentration camp with a bombing raid to try to free prisoners. That's just not something that we decided to do, which must have been a very difficult decision to make. And if we end the war faster, it will save lives. That was the call. I wouldn't have wanted to have made that call myself. But I will tell you that the recognition of the Holocaust and the recognition of unbelievable numbers of people killed for reasons of religion and ethnicity and things like that are going to lead to some dramatic changes in the world post-war. Lots of agreements that we'll talk about. The creation of the United Nations was one of them. In 1948, we have the Genocide Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Geneva Convention. These things all came out as a result of seeing the horror of the Holocaust, and then seeing the horror of the most deadly war the world had ever seen. At the end of the war in Europe, which we called VE Day, we had to decide what the heck to do with captured Nazis. And that's a big question. The Soviets wanted to shoot them. The British, actually Winston Churchill, considered summary executions without a trial. And there was certainly talk about using the military to try these individuals. It's a heck of a lot easier. The United States, this is a peep in my hand, by the way. The United States decided what we should do is we should actually try them in a court of law and allow them a defense. So actually let them have a lawyer. And the reason that we decided to do this was, first off, we won and we were powerful, and because of that, we could be better. If you're powerful, if you're strong, you can afford to be amazing. You don't have to be a bully. And that's what we decided to do. Now, we did not treat the Japanese in this manner. Most of the Japanese were actually treated more along the lines of a military type of a trial, if they were given a trial. The trial itself is going to be located in the German city of Nuremberg. And the reason that we chose Nuremberg is that Nuremberg had been a hotbed of Nazism. The people of Berlin were not terribly taken with Hitler, but Nuremberg really was, and there were just massive rallies all the time there, particularly Hitler's birthday rallies and things like that. So it was really seen as a huge victory because we held the trials there, where Nazism was seen as having been its strongest. What's going to happen is the Nuremberg trials are going to lead to a permanent international court at The Hague. The idea that you can charge people with crimes against humanity and that following unlawful orders is never an excuse. Between 1945 and 1946, you have the trial of the major war criminals. There were 24 indictments. That means basically 24 people were charged. 6 organizations like the Gestapo. And these guys are all going to come up with basically the same type of defense with their lawyers. Number one, which is really kind of an interesting thing, is they claimed that the laws that made what they were doing illegal were created after the fact, or after they had committed these horrific acts. That's known as an ex post facto law, or after the fact. And they said, you know what, it wasn't illegal when we did it, therefore it's not illegal. All right? Next, they claimed basically all of them, that they were simply following orders. And it was really easy to blame Hitler because he was dead. He had died of suicide in his bunker. So what you have is these high-ranking guys that have lawyers, and basically the world is looking on, and we, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, were able to compile real live evidence and testimony against these individuals and put it into a permanent record. And we judged them. Cool things that came out of Nuremberg was like a simultaneous translation system that IBM produced. It was the prototype of what is used today with the United Nations. If you watch members of the United Nations, they're usually sitting and listening to headphones or something like that, and they're getting a instantaneous translation of what the person is saying. It's really cool. Basically, what's going to come out of the Nuremberg trials is all but 3 of the individuals are going to be found guilty. 12 of them are going to be sentenced to death by hanging. And what this is going to do for the world, it's going to show, and this is huge, it's going to show that the world can judge evil. It is completely appropriate for civilized nations and civilized people to judge others. And if what those others are doing is deemed inappropriate, if it's deemed a crime against humanity or something like that, the rest of the world can sit in judgment on them. And this is a very important deal, and it's going to contribute to later the United Nations and other treaties and also alliances moving forward. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the war wasn't over. The United States was still fighting the Japanese. And when the United States moved from island to island, you already know about this, in the Pacific, the toll was unbelievable. The Japanese soldiers just didn't surrender, nor did they have any real ability to surrender, because if you're on an island, there's not a lot of places you can go. And so we were sustaining unbelievable casualties. Obviously, the Japanese were sustaining unbelievable casualties. And once we realized, hey, we have this atomic bomb. We don't have a lot of them, but it can destroy a city essentially with one plane. And the question is this justified? Can you knowingly bomb a city and destroy an entire city? Is it justified? And the United States came to the decision, and Truman had to decide this. FDR had passed. Our president had to decide, was it okay to do this? And he decided yes, because he believed that if the United States were forced to invade the Japanese home islands, it would cost well over 100,000 American casualties. Now, we lost about 400,000 American casualties as it was in the entire war. So this was a big deal, or would have been a big deal. It was also believed that the Japanese might suffer up to 1 million casualties. It could be horrific on all sides. Also, the bomb was pretty expensive to produce. It cost a lot of money. And there was a little bit of a benefit. If we bombed a city and it blew up and it worked, we would be unbelievably powerful and could control the post-war world. We could intimidate potential enemies, and we were already looking at the Soviet Union at this point, just so you know. So we decided that it was appropriate to bomb the city of Hiroshima and then also Nagasaki. And while we had bombed Tokyo before and killed thousands upon thousands of people, and while we had bombed targets in Germany and killed tons of people, I mean, this is unbelievably devastating, it was the idea that it was basically one plane and one really big bomb that was a big deal. And that's why this is something that is still discussed today. The United States is the only nation that has ever used an atomic bomb in anger. Hopefully, we will be the last. Thank you guys for listening. I hope that you've learned something, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.